Director for the program on global sustainability and resilience. And I have the task of thanking people, but I want to begin by thanking the audience for being patient. We apologize for a little delay, but we're all here. And it's going to be, I'm sure you'll feel as if the wait was well worth it. In order to keep my remarks very brief, I just want to thank Dr. Ishii for coming and joining us. I want to thank Tom Lovejoy for being such a good collaborator with the center in so many different ways, with so many of us at the center. And I want to thank my colleagues at the Brazil Institute who really are responsible for organizing this event together with your colleagues at GEF. And I think at this point, since we are running a little late, I simply am going to step away and turn the floor over to the people who really have something to say. Thank you very much.
So let me just introduce you. So it is my distinct delight, after planning this for some months, to finally have the opportunity to introduce the fourth CEO of the Global Environment Facility, Dr. Naoko Ishii. You have her bio, so I won't go on at length because it's much more important to hear from you. But in her history, she has been Deputy Vice Minister for Finance of Japan. She's occupied a number of posts at the World Bank, ran the World Bank office in Sri Lanka during very difficult times, and blew into my life about the 8th of June last year. And it's been just a wonderful treat to get to know Naoko, her vision, her energy, and her can-do attitude. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Ishii.
Do you have a mic or we just have to use it?
Use that one or the one from the stage.
So I have a mobility restriction. All right. Good afternoon to everybody, and I really apologize that we start a little late. I first of all would like to thank Mr. Blair Rubel of Wilson Center and the collaboration in collaboration with George Mason University, and of course my dear friend Tom Lovejoy, who has been my soulmate for, I would like to say, years, but then myself I'm surprised that I only know him actually about a year, but I just feel that I have been actually working with him and under his guidance so long. Today our topic is the GEF and looking forward. Actually, may I ask how many of you really know GEF? Could you just raise hand? Oh, this is a very exceptional crowd. I mean, usually I see 10% of the audience know about GEF, so I usually start at what the GEF is, but it seems to me we could actually skip that section. Picture. And today I want to do actually three things in this brief presentation. The first one is that where we are on this global environment, why we have this crisis, I would say crisis, and then what is the GEF and how the GEF has been helping or addressing those issues, but maybe most importantly going forward, I mean that how can we do better? And in this case, we means not only GEF, but actually everybody, including you. Maybe actually Tom made a very nice introduction about me and GEF, but let me just maybe briefly say who I am. Until very recently, I was with the Japanese government and working for Ministry of Finance. And actually, but in 30 years or so, I have been working for development mostly. And you may wonder why a person working for Ministry of Finance or Development is interested in taking this position, who is more like a protection of global environment. The reason is, to me, it's a very natural and simple. If you are serious about development for the last 20 to 30 years, you came to understand the sustainable development needs the environment, and the environment needs a development. So to me, this journey from finance and development towards the environment is a quite a natural evolvement. And I'm very happy to also to share with you for the last 20 years or so, I observed the nature of the conversation changed dramatically. Say 20 years ago, when actually GEF was born, I was working for Africa as an IMF economist, but around that time there was no conversation about the environment when we discussed growth and development, and there was a lot of tension between environment and development. But since then, maybe for the last 20 years or so, I observed the nature of the dialogue changed, and the nature become a, well, let me say this way, 20 years ago, the nature is something you have to protect from development. But these days, I think that many of the leaders realize that the nature is something you can invest for development. Incidentally, yesterday I spent 2 hours with the president of Myanmar, Obama, on the boat from Mount Vernon to Washington Harbor. And during that 2 hours, the president of Myanmar very eloquently mentioned that the nature, in this case actually tiger, particularly, is becoming something they can really invest for development. And beyond tiger, of course, there are a lot he thinks that he needs to take care of, not for the nature itself, but more for the sustainable foundation for sustainable development. So he's actually wondering how he could integrate nature or ecosystem or natural capital into his development plan. And it's really soothing, and it's so exciting to hear directly from a leader who is kind of a little bit maybe new to us, that think along the same line, that or maybe more than we think about this importance of the nature into the sustainable development. So it's basically, well, a long introduction, but the who I am and why I get very much interested in this job of the Global Environment Facility. So going back to this slide, you may have seen this maybe already 10 times or more. It become maybe one of the public goods these days in the domain, public domain. But we, the scientists, many of them, not all of them, arguably are debating these days that we may have entered into a new ecological epoch. So we are leaving maybe from Holocene to Anthropocene, and according to their kind of concept or thinking, that we are entering into this new era, the new era of the human development, when our interaction with the Earth ecosystem is actually pushing the limitation or boundary of the Earth ecosystem beyond the point that the Earth itself, the ecosystem itself, can regulate itself, or in other way, that maybe beyond that tipping point or safe planetary boundary, we really don't know, that we cannot really exclude that what would be the reaction from the Earth system to us, and maybe that to try to get the system back, maybe either too costly or simply impossible. So that so based on that kind of discussion, which is very rough to scientists, and I'm sure many of you are scientists, so allow me to be very, very oversimplistic. I'm economist. I'm not really trained by the scientific term, but if I just try to summarize or interpret what the scientific argument is happening. That's the way I interpret it. And this picture is actually the outcome of this group and led by a Stockholm Resilience Center. They started this work 2008 and tried to identify the planetary boundaries. So that they try to actually quantify among the 9 important Earth ecosystem, which one is kind of being pushed towards the boundary, which one seems actually still okay in terms of human interaction with the system. And this red is, of course, a red zone. So according to their calculation, apparently that we have already exceeded some of the key Earth ecosystem. Some of them still look like okay, this is a chemical, but they made it very clear that it's not that they are safe. They just cannot yet quantify what's the boundary would be. So the point here is that we have been pushing this limitation of boundary of the Earth ecosystem, and some of them we may have already gone beyond. And another important thing is that those ecosystems are quite interlinked, so that it's a kind of moving and together do the disproportionately. And interesting thing that if you know that GEF has been operating most of this Earth ecosystem. So we have quite an opportunity to try to address this important issue in a very integrated, coherent way. So so actually those group of scientists named this new ecological epoch as an Anthropocene. But here that simply I just want to repeat their message that there are now that many of us Anthropocene that human beings are kind of threatening this Earth's capacity of regulate itself, and we really need to find a way to address those urgent issues jointly or collectively. But how then that so let's think about how we can most effectively address this urgent and very, very critical issues. What is the conceptual framework to address it? Now the struggle began. Let's think about what are the trends or drivers behind those degradation of Earth ecosystem. I think that we can think of broadly 3 mega drivers or 3 mega trends behind this degradation of global environment. One is a population growth. We know that now we have 7 billion population, which is going to 9 billion by 2050, maybe. Then another second important mega trend, it is combined with 3 billion new middle class, which is much richer, and their consumption pattern will be very, very different. Then a third mega trend, and most of them are likely to live in cities, so that the growing population, middle class, then urbanization. Those are the 3 mega trends behind this global environmental degradation. So the question, how we can address that those key drivers. Of course, it's quite challenging to think about how we can contain the population, how we can stop that urbanization. That's not really the right way to think about. So we are thinking of how we can actually make a kind of log frame of this. So here on the right side, from your left side, that the main global drivers are population growth, middle income, middle class, and urbanization. The right-hand column is this symptoms, degradation of the global commons. We talk about the climate change, biodiversity, the land and ocean, the fresh water. So how we can, where we are the kind of entry points we could address this framework. So the challenge of those three megatrends is clearly pointing to that the world find a need to way to feed this growing population and richer population. So how to address the food demand or food security issue? We need to find a way to how to meet the demand of transportation, energy, and other resources, and how we can make sure that the urbanization cities are maintained to be smart or sustainable or livable. So these are kind of main sectoral drivers coming from megatrend and towards the degradation of commons. And then we can have this proxy, the drivers between main sectoral drivers and global degradation. But maybe that we should focus on these main sectoral drivers and think about how we can effectively address the causes of global environmental degradation. That's a kind of approach we would like to pass a little bit here. One thing before we enter into this business model or the framework, throughout this presentation, I would like to draw your attention to this countdown for the global environment, which was that very much of the right column you have seen. And one clear conviction I do have is the business as usual doesn't really help us. It doesn't really take us to address the global environmental crisis. And if we really don't do anything now, if there is no bold action taken, the world we will be seeing in, say, 2030 will be a very, very different and uncomfortable world. Maybe the audience like you, I don't have to repeat, but then if without any urgent bold action, the climate will be much warmer. We just hit 400 mmP, so we all know that we are going into the wrong direction. But under this 2000, also say by 2030, the extreme weathers become new normal. Actually, even yesterday, Myanmar president talked about how difficult to handle this extreme weather. So it's not really 2030 time. It's actually today as a part of this world. Then if we go to underwater, a lot of coral reefs, and which is now consist of 1/4 of marine biodiversity, will be completely disappearing in some of the part of the ocean. And just a side step, I'm quite a keen diver, so that I really want to have my personal interest to arrest this bleach of coral reefs. In fact, I'm now even thinking that in the next vacation, which ocean I should go, because then on some part of the world, coral reef bleaching is coral bleaching is progressing at an amazing speed. Then that 120 million hectare of forest is actually that is more than the size of the Texas is actually disappearing. Then that 700 million people will be displaced because of water scarcity. So this is the world that we will be seeing that in 2030 if we don't take actions. So that it's very important for us to think that where we can really find the tipping points, the points we can effectively arrest those causal chain. So we were just talking about this global environmental symptom side, but the challenge we are facing is how we can find the best way to effectively intervene and to have an impact of this chain from main global drivers towards the global environmental degradation. Just a bit of the reflection of why we do have this problem. We talk about megatrend, it's the kind of causes side, but then beyond that, and particularly when we think about global environmental issue, we have a particular specific challenge in this issue. Some of you may have heard about tragedy of commons, and this concept was originally coming around mid 19th century, but and talking about the medieval land tenure in Europe. There is a kind of common pasture that the villagers can jointly own, and the villagers can actually is allowed to bring his or her own cow. But if that he or she add one more cow, it definitely degrade that the quality of that pasture. But then if that he or she herders that behave rationally, of course adding one more cow is her interest, but then it really doesn't serve the interest of the village as a whole. So you will see a lot of individual herders who want to have more cows, but then at the cost of very much degraded common or commonly owned pasture. So that's the kind of nature of this global tragedy of commons. And when I think about the global environment, I think that's exactly the nature of the problem we are having. A global environment we are now talking about, thinking about, caring for, is really the extreme pattern or the model of this global commons. It's not really owned by one country or one individual, but it has to be taken care of by entire human beings. And but we have everybody has an incentive to exploit it for free, but then the cost of that exploitation will be borne by, again, everybody, and what's worse, it's going beyond the generation. So it's a transnational issue, and it's a beyond generations issue. So global commons is doubly challenging a policy subject, in my view. Well, but of course that in the past we have done some good effort, and in fact creation of the GEF itself was one of the efforts to try to address this global environmental common issue. GEF was created 20 plus years ago in the spirit of the first Rio summit in Rio, and we are actually created to serve the 3 global environmental treaties: the climate change, biodiversity, and land degradation. So there was an effort made in this case, and so far in the past 20 years, we allocated 11 billion US dollars and co-financed by 57 billion and over 3,200 projects in 165 countries. So, and most of those projects are rated satisfactory. The area we have been working is that biodiversity and climate change, 30%, 30%, followed by international water, and then other areas like land and chemical. So, in a sense that we have been making a quite good effort, but then and let me just very briefly, it seems you know that, GEF, so I can skip this part very quickly, but there are few interesting model that GEF has been employing. One model is basically investing in green infrastructure, so that in this case that it's a Brazilian Amazon protection or stopping or slowing the deforestation, and together with a Brazilian Fumbio, it's a national fund, together with a World Bank and some bilateral government and NGO, and we have been successful in actually decreasing or slowing the deforestation ratio of Amazon. There is a very interesting debate to what extent that slowing down is attributed to this project. or actually that decline in the price of the timber or commodity. But that's another, it's a subject to the maybe another discussion. But this is a kind of very well recognized that instrument basically to invest in green infrastructure. Another influence model of the GEF is how to transform the policy, because that investment is one thing, but how to change and help the government reform the policy is another, which I think that's a very, very important part of the GEF's instrument. Here, the example is that we have been working very closely with the Chinese government to help them reform their renewable energy policy and regulation, which actually helps that to increase their wind capacity. And in 2012, in fact, wind power grew more than at a faster rate than electricity from coal. So apparently we have been making, actually they have been making a quite an impact in it. Another model is how to support the innovation, because our resources are all in grant basis. We can take a lot of risk, which that the private sector cannot take. So this is a promotion. In this case, we help that to adopt and prove the new technology. In this case, it's concentrating solar power, and which has been invested in the Morocco, Brazil, and Egypt, which Mexico, which have been quite proven to be successful. Then another model is this how to mobilize that other stakeholders. Example is that how to fight the desertification in Africa. GEF's money be utilized to team up the 9 African countries to fight together the desertification of the Sahel. And this was also that very well by creating the so-called African Great Green Wall. This was also very well recognized as a kind of platform for different stakeholders, diverse stakeholders. Maybe the last model is that how to set the standard for the market. Example is this how to phase out the inefficient lighting, working together with Philips and Osram, and to create a standard model or standard regulation for the government, so that the government can kind of phasing out that inefficient bulbs in over years. And once this is implemented by countries around the globe, it will be very, very impactful to save the electricity consumption. Already about 30 countries have signed up this, so we would like to see more of this kind of effort supported by the GEF. But all in all, with all those beautiful examples and 20 years of investment, are we really addressing the global environmental degradation? Are we really making the dent in this trend? That is the question we have in front of us. And if we just pick up the few areas of biodiversity, the fresh water, the climate change, and food, the liver. The right-hand column shows that the needs, global needs, mostly calculated by either resources or the unit. Then the left-hand side is something that GEF has been helping. And in many cases, you see that our impacts, even joined by other partners, is so small against the global needs. So that's the reality. So it's of course better than nothing, but are we really making the dent? are we really saving the world? The answer is clearly, well, not yet. So that then how then we could be more impactful to address this trend. So going forward, now I'm going into the last part of my presentation. The going forward, we are thinking of proposing a few different way of doing business. Thinking about how we can more effectively address the drivers, which is close to the mega trend, not only just addressing symptom side. So let's think about maybe forest. We know the major drivers, one of the major drivers of forest loss is actually that several of global commodities like a palm oil, soybeans, the lunch or the cattle, or the rice and those global commodities, which is actually driven by the food security thing. So how we can address that industry or that part of the causality. This shows that I don't know if you can read it, but it's a cattle palm oil, the fish and the rice wheat, the soy, and so you can see that how those just a handful commodities do have an impact of deforestation and also water, land use, and those kind of global commons to what extent. Could we address those drivers or sub-drivers more effectively? In fact, you must know that there are already a lot of attempts ongoing these days that some of the private sector, several CSOs are coming together to try to address or adopt a supply chain instrument. The idea is that if we want to address, say, cattle industry, if we want to address palm oil, if we want to address soybeans, shouldn't we bring those stakeholders together and find a way to affect the deforestation or take the deforestation factor out of the supply chain? Here is a case of the palm oil. We more or less know there are just a handful of countries, and some of them have big plantations and smallholders. Then they have a producer, they have a processor, they have a brand and wholesale chain, and then consumers, retail chain and consumers. And some of you, our group, have been already working that how to bring those people, stakeholders together to create a platform, and at each section of interaction or supply chain, we should be able to incentivize or disincentivize either by tax or subsidy, or either by regulation or peer pressure, or to change the behavior along the supply chain. So there are already several round table, consumer goods table, the coalition of producers to consumers to retailers. So, but we need to, it may be good idea for us to strengthen that supply chain analysis or supply chain approach. And we at GEF have been very, very interested in joining this kind of effort. Another tipping points or important or interesting example will be Amazon. Rainforest is maybe one of the important earth ecosystem in terms of regulating climate And we were told by scientists that in this world there are only two big blocks remain in terms of significance. It's an Amazon and the Congo Basin. And in case of Amazon, we were also told the clock is ticking quite fast, so it's really good time to do something. I was in Brazil 3 weeks ago and having a conversation with the government of Brazil, how they see this issue. And it's quite striking that they also take this so seriously. And it's not only protection, just protecting the Amazon really doesn't suffice. And they have to find a way to how to address this and a very aggressive infrastructure of the electricity, and the road and waterways, and how to also feed the people along this Amazon River. So how we can integrate those and sustainable development when we talk about what's next in Amazon. And it's clear that they have to also team up with neighboring countries and the industries. So we will be working with them to help them create a new platform of Amazon development. So this is just another example we want to do. Maybe third program we are promoting is that how to address the food security, and particularly in Africa, which is very much based on or driven by the our land degradation work. Here we need to team up with a non-traditional conventional group like a Green Revolution in Africa, the CGIAR and others who have been in the field and working very hard on this. Maybe a final item, but one is the fish. This is also very important and interesting global commons, and you may know now that 80% of the fish is either already depleted or overexploited or threatened, managed for recovery. So very limited number of fish stock is considered to be safe. This picture was actually taken in 1950s, and as a result of one-day recreation in Gulf of Mexico. Here, this is 20 years ago, the same spot, more or less the same spot, and same one-day recreational trip. You can clearly see the dramatic change in the kind and the composition and the size. And of course, this is something you can get today. So in 50 years or so, we observed a huge and dramatic decline of the stock of fish. But good news is that in case of fishery or overfishing, it seems there are quite a good example which proven success to some extent. For instance, it has been already proven that a very carefully designed no-take zone or marine protection areas has been very useful. And there is an idea that to bring the rights-based fishing, how to bring the 50% of the fish under this rights-based fishing in 10 years. This initiative is called 15 in 10. And there are several institutions already working towards this goal. And I found this kind of a coalition which involves the private sector, countries, and producers and consumers together. It's very, very interesting way of doing business. Actually, I had one more example here. It's one of the reason of the loss of biodiversity is actually illegal trafficking. And these days you may have heard a lot about ivory trade in Africa, which is going to be quite a critical stage. We are now proposing to team up with again non-conventional players to come up with a more forceful platform. And the challenge is that how to involve the demand side, not only supply side. So, but the good news is that the demand side countries on the demand side are showing at least necessity to address that. So I have a lot of hope to create, to join this platform more effective way. So my last proposal to you, just presenting the new way of doing business, is actually cities. You know this chart, so I could just stop it. But here, the anthropogenic drivers of the climate change is how to feed and meet the demand of this growing population of the middle class living in cities, so that city become a place to kind of demonstrate, or it's a meeting place of challenges. So here, that our proposal is that how we can work with cities to make their cities more sustainable. There are two reasons that we want to focus cities. That one is that where 2/3 of the energy consumptions are taking in cities, 80% of the CO2 emissions are in cities, and half of the population live in cities. It's going to be maybe 80%. So the city is basically the meeting place. But the second important point why we want to work with city is because city mayors, the decision authorities are much closer to the citizens or their constituencies. So it seems to me that they are, in a sense, quicker to take action, or at least much more pressure to take action. So it's a kind of attraction to or benefit to work with cities more closely. So these are also the chemical become another important thing. But these are actually the 5 or 6 programs we are trying to promote or propose to donors and the communities, and as a means or instrument or approach to address the drivers, not only symptoms, more effectively. In order for us, a institution like GEF, whose money is a drop in the ocean, to be much more impactful to address the global commons. So with that, I will end my presentation, but I'm very much willing to receive your feedback to make our approach more kind of meaningful. Thank you so much.
So questions, comments for Dr. Ishii? Naoko. On the aisle, please, and please identify yourself.
Thank you. Patricia Zurita, Executive Director of the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund. Hi, Naoko. Great presentation. Is phenomenal to see how you guys are moving forward, the plan for the replenishment and the new ways of working with the GEF. Very interesting to see the new actors that you're bringing to the table, thinking about private sector and their role. I wanted to ask you, though, the GEF has had a phenomenal role supporting civil society, other than private sector, and these groups of organizations, both local and international, that have been innovators and the shakers and the movers of a lot of these new solutions that could be bringing this agenda forward. What is the vision of the GEF in this new in this new replenishment of engaging with, and or is that role changing with civil society, and if so, how?
Should I just take one moment? Hi, nice seeing you. That's actually very, very important and maybe very inviting question for me. If you look at the history of the GEF, the role of the civil society, again, that and it also depends on how to measure it, is actually not necessarily increasing, but it's a bit of declining. The reason is that we have in the past a kind of shifting the resource allocation model and to allocate resources and the countries. Then once the country receive the resources, now it's their turn to how to design the program or projects. And not all countries are very much willing or actually to or interested in the bringing the civil society much upfront. So that when we see that engagement with the civil society, the level of the engagement, if we just very simply capture just by number, is not necessarily increasing. It's more like a downward trend, which I think it's a huge missed opportunity. And I strongly believe that the civil society could bring something which the other actors are not able to bring. And we really want to find a much better space and for them to play the bigger role. And if you take a look at signature program I proposed, you will see the civil society can be a very, very key actor in it. The fishing issue, there are already several CSOs working on that. Amazon, definitely. Then this global commodities. We know that some of them are already the very, very strong member of that, because they also have a very good link with working with the private sector as well as communities. So that you can see that there is a much more space under this newly proposed signature program. Now the challenge is that how we can really gain the support for this kind of new way of doing business. It's a bit of the departure from conventional country allocation system. And of course, that from country point of view, they become very nervous that maybe my allocation being taken away, so that what is my entitlement? So that's a kind of battle or the anxiety within the system. So we have a huge challenge going forward to convince them that by introducing this kind of program, their future will be much better assured. The challenge is how we can really convince and make that point. So that again, that it's a new way of doing business, and it's a bit of the expansion of what we already have in a smaller way. But we are really trying to prove that this new kind of business model is very much needed to effectively address the global environmental commons, and the private sector and the CSOs are two kind of actors who I think that could play a much more prominent role in the new model. But that's exactly the point that the countries become nervous. So that the burden of the proof is very much on our side, and how we can ensure that their long-term environmental and sustainable development benefit is actually much better assured by this kind of approach.
Right down there, please.
Thank you so much, Georgis Mihais from Finnish Partnership. You accumulated remarkable amount of knowledge during 20 years. And also Japan, I've been working a few years in Japan as well in Scandinavia. My question is the following. You have accumulated sort of mega projects type of knowledge, experiences, and now I know pretty well Danube project, which has tremendous impact. Danube, from and including political, but not to mention economic, biodiversity. It's very far-reaching, and there are a lot of things to be learned from, including cooperation with European Union, Germany involved, which is not new. Well, it's Black Forest. So, but it's a remarkable success, including supporting democracy in those countries. And so, my question is, given the advance in particular Scandinavian countries and Japan, regarding the local community capacity to manage the climate change, to create business models. In particular, Nordic countries lately came with a lot of initiatives, plans, Nordic Council, including branding and going very far and deep in creating opportunities and developing, creating further benefits, social, economic, even cultural benefits. And then UNESCO had been doing some work for what is called biocultural diversity, which could be probably an instrument to teach further to, local communities. And my first question would be, do you think we could have like a sort of projects to learn from what you have been accumulating and to create a knowledge base individualized by type of local areas, coastal areas, mountain. My experience in Scandinavia and a little bit in Japan is local communities today are more than aware, ready to create specific local development projects generating value, including economic value. So I'm aware that mega projects, Amazon and all those projects I'm fully aware one should pursue. But today, if we could disseminate by category of local communities, of course, there's a lot of debate how to categorize whether it's coastal area or mountain, whether it's tropical or others. But I think it would make a lot of sense to start. And my second part of the question is, maybe we could have model areas, model areas. Like in Scandinavia, we can take rural area, also some urban area in Japan, in other countries, and to define some model to build it up to those who are capable to absorb this knowledge and to implement it.
Good. Well, thank you. And
Thank you.
I think you have sort of a two-part question there.
Question, yeah. The first part, thank you for acknowledging that the new, which is my favorite project, because it really showed the ability of the GEF creating trusting platform which goes beyond actually 17 countries or something, and overcome the distrust among the former Soviet Union countries, and by showing that collaboration will give them more than lack of collaboration. So that was definitely my favorite, the project which I'm really proud of. It actually shows that also the power of the community. You mentioned Amazon, but then Amazon also has actually a lot of the contribution by community and also indigenous people. We really rely on their knowledge and ability and the monitoring the capability and their local knowledge, and the more we can utilize their asset, the project will has a much more success and chance of the success. So even if I talk about a mega project, a mega thing, that I think that each one of them do have a huge space for community, which will enhance the chance of the success of those mega community. Global supply chain, we need to find a way to how to incentivize the local, actually smallholders in addition to huge plantations. Fishing project needs to find how to work with the local fishing communities. So all of them do have a kind of not only space but a role, the expectation that played by the communities. And I hope by creating this new way of doing business, we will have more opportunities to, or open space to those new, not new, but then the actors or players. That is my hope. The knowledge base is, to be very honest, this is something we need to work on more and more. Yes, we are proudly saying we have 20 years of experience, but can other players outside the GEF can really utilize them? Maybe we need a lot more work to kind of analyze and present in a usable way. And this is actually something we are thinking of, actually how to strengthen this knowledge platform going forward. So.
Great. Thank you, Naoko. I think Randy in the back, Randy Curtis.
Yes, thank you. Randy Curtis with the Nature Conservancy. Thank you, Dr. Ishii. Last year, shortly after you started your job, you spoke about ministers of finance, and you said that was one of your favorite questions because you had just come from a Ministry of Finance. And I'm wondering now, almost a year later, what your thoughts are about how we can better engage ministries of finance. Tom Lovejoy was on a panel with a number of people recently in Panama at the Inter-American Development Bank annual meeting, and one of the panelists was a co-director of the Central Bank of Colombia, and he electrified, I think that's a fair term, he electrified the crowd, about 300 people in the audience, about his ideas on incentives and fiscal policy that he was promoting and that ministries of finance could promote to encourage sustainable development. He said it wasn't just about incentives, it was also about regulation. But he felt there was a huge role for ministries of finance. And I'm wondering how we can better reach those and help them build their own network through the GEF. Thank you.
Thank you so much for remembering my first question or aspiration. I still do have that aspiration, actually, that I'm more convinced that it is important because in order for us, a ocean in the drip, to have a much more systemic impact, we need to find a way to mainstream, first of all, our GEF supported program or projects into the more systemic way, either through budget or regulation or national planning or whatever way appropriate to that particular issue. So talking to actually the ministry, either of finance or development or investment, or sometimes it's more like an aligned ministry that who have a sectoral regulatory power, is still, it's a very important way go forward. In fact, I was in India just 2 weeks ago and had a conversation with both the environmental ministry as well as the finance ministry, and how to mainstream environmental agendas through their, national planning. Sometimes it's a very contentious conversation because everybody knows that every ministry wants to have a monopolize their limited resources. So the environmental ministry, of course, are not necessarily very much keen releasing it to the finance. But some of the very forward-looking governments and the Ministry of Environment know that that will be the most effective way for his agenda to be mainstreamed at the national level. So we are kind of trying to find out in which country, which model, which sector we can find those champions, and hoping that it will split or other countries to learn a little bit from those successful model. So this going back to Amazon, that yesterday I talked to environmental ministry in Brazil. I also talked to the finance and the foreign and other line ministries. And the good part is they are coming together as a platform. So we need to really create more of those kind of things, and knowing it's not that easy because it's a their own political battle in it. So we got kind of, find the champion here and there. But to me, it's very important, particularly for a country who received a huge allocation from the GEF. We got to make sure that those resources are strategically allocated and utilized, not only to produce their own local benefit, but to the global commons. So, yes, that.
So that's in my sense, is a completely new role for the GEF, was actually engaging with different ministries in a particular government to actually strengthen the collaboration rather than just be implementing individual projects. So, yes. It's coming.
Coming from back.
Thanks so much, Lisa Friedman from Climate Wire. Thanks for doing this. This isn't directly GEF related, but you've been deeply engaged on the development of the Green Climate Fund and a proponent of leveraging private sector funding for that fund, which may or may not reach $100 billion a year by 2020. Can you give us an update on that, and particularly the discussions about leveraging private finance? Is it coming? When is it coming? Is there any new money on the table? What are agencies like? What are groups like the GEF doing to pressure both governments and private sector to start putting money on the table soon?
Yeah, good question. Yes, actually, GEF is also tasked to help the Green Climate Fund up and running. We are still kind of joint secretariat with UNFCCC, so we are jointly tasked to make it happen. I think there are two important points of this leveraging thing. The one is that with the private sector, particularly, and there is a huge hope and expectation that this public sector money can leverage the private sector by taking risks and sharing the risks. And that's a kind of model we are pursuing. And the GEF has been, I think that been a very good place for GCF to take a look at what was the success model, what was not. In my mind, we have a several very good model of catalyzing a private sector financing. The challenge is that even if one model is successful in one country, taking some risk, that it's not necessarily being easily replicated to other sector of the other countries, because market is different, capacity is different, and capacity of the private sector banks in that country is different. So replication is not really taking place that easily. That was my finding. But again, that key success to GCF, in my view, is a private sector facility. How we can design it the most conducive, effective way. And we are working on that. Between GCF and GEF, I think that we are looking for the complementarity to help each other in a sense. So we are very much in the day-to-day conversation with the UNFCCC that how we can help them, particularly for private sector financing side, and what in that what would be also our role in it. Am I answering or? No, I don't think that they are asking the PSF yet. It's more like to create a private sector facility first and see that if that will catalyze that private sector money. But my understanding is that they try to utilize the public sector money to catalyze the private sector financing through PSF. So it's not necessarily the private sector put money to use it. It's more like how to leverage utilizing the public sector money.
Yes. On the aisle there.
Chris Marcoux, DePauw University, and aiddata.org. So my question relates to your vision for the current and future role of the GEF against a backdrop of what I've sort of discovered as the increasingly what I would describe as the increasing bilateralization of development assistance for global environmental goods. specifically with, also with respect, I should say, to the Green Climate Fund as well. I mean, do you see a greater role in the future for the GEF as, as a delivery channel for aid, or do you increasingly see the GEF as a risk taker and, doing doing projects for their demonstration value and that sort of thing? And then I guess lastly, do you see problems, if this current trend continues? I mean, do you see problems with the provision of aid increasingly through bilateral channels rather than through multilateral organizations such as yours?
Very stimulating question. When the GEF was created, actually there is definitely less players in that field, and what we have observed is for the last few years, particularly this place of the environmental finance has been very, very crowded, and that actually also made me think that what's our value proposition of the GEF. We initiated this GEF long-term strategy based on that kind of thinking. What is our way forward, or what is our unique value proposition in this crowded space, and do we really have it, and can we sharpen up, and what would be also then the relationship with other actors? My view is that bilateral fund, and I would say you are dead right. Whenever I talk to the bilateral government, there is a strong tendency that they want to go more for the bilateral, their own channel, rather than diverting the resources from multilateral to bilateral. So it's really important for us to sharpen up and identify our raison d'etre or value proposition. In my view, I don't expect us to be just a delivery channel. They can deliver their own resources through their channel, and by doing that, they can gain more the political capital in their home country. So I see our role is more like a catalyst, and creating a space where they can also play that own role. You mentioned that taking the risk, which is quite true for the technology transfer or climate change mitigation part, but also our catalytic role. If you remember, I introduced you the 5 or 6 influencing model of the GEF. Maybe investment can be done also the bilateral, but all the influencing model, I actually have chosen that thinking about what would be our unique instrument or unique value at helping the government transform their regulatory framework, the policy, definitely one, and introducing the standardization, or helping to introduce the standardization not only in one country but along the globe is definitely another. Today I was talking to one of the private sector coming from Europe that how to prepare the government the platform for green chemistry, I would say, that how to introduce that the better regulatory framework for e-waste. And this something that the public sector can do much better, utilizing our small resources for capacity building and else. So then mobilizing partners. This can be maybe done by also the bilateral, but also could be done, and particularly if we are talking about real transnational program. So many of our unique value proposition, I believe, are the mostly maybe better played by multilateral, and I think the message is that we really need to focus more and more on those roles that only multilateral can deliver or can effectively play out. And I see the more opportunity to have a complementary role between bilateral and multilateral, and that is the way I think that we should go.
Great. So there was a question right behind.
Hi, my name is Laura Sauls, and I work for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And I was really interested to hear about the work that the GEF will be doing on sustainable cities. And I know that you spoke earlier about working with directing finances to countries. I know the Small Grants Program has historically been a huge supporter of civil society organizations. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about how the GEF will engage with local governments, and also how in a situation where local governments are more responsive to their constituents and therefore tend to define their problems in a local manner, how the GEF will be kind of bridging local problems and interests with the global environment needs. Thank you.
Thank you. We have several projects whose counterpart are more the cities rather than national government. But the program we are trying to propose is that we, rather than just focusing on one particular project or the sector, in that if we could help the city planners in a more the comprehensive way and find that how their planning become much more environmentally sustainable or greener, clean and resilient. That was the idea. At the same time, we very well aware this place is also very, very crowded. Many players are already there, including bilaterals. So that right now we are actually trying to see that kind of mapping and where that the Fitch mayors are much more interested in working with an institution like us, and where that the niche will be there, and where we can really demonstrate our value. It seems that the challenge is that from demand side and supply side, and how we can identify those, and the ones interested in working, but also that our capacity to deliver and identify niche and the capacity to deliver based on our 20 years of the experience. Interesting thing is that the Chinese government is very, very interested in working on that, because this an ecological city is one of their 12th 5-year program, and they actually invited us to visit 2 of their cities. So here our program is to first really map out and identify what is the expectation, where against that, and knowing that the others are already working on that, how we could really help the city mayors to kind of make their plan more environmentally sustainable. So it's a bit of a new way of doing business. I really can't say more than that. And so we will look forward to, maybe if you have good suggestions, let us know how we could do things better.
So I think we probably only have time for 2 more questions. One right on the aisle here.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. I am Ana Boisquio, advisor in toxicology of the Pan American Health Organization. So I'm glad you have a slide on chemical toxins, but I'm sorry you didn't spend too much time on that, but it's fine, because I visit your website very often, and I must say that it's very helpful to have this level of transparency, because I am in this intersectoral type of work, and I am always pushing the health component of, environmental agenda, environmental health. And my question for you is more on the new convention, global convention, Minamata Convention of Mercury. We have heard that the GEF is going to have the mechanisms to finance. And it's going to be a huge amount of, I think, financial resources and efforts required to implement many of the aspects of this convention. I would like to hear some comments and how could we get closer on, getting to speed up on that, because I know it's not signed yet, but it will be signed soon and enter in force. Thank you.
Thank you. I was actually in Geneva when this Minamata Convention is kind of, could I say, adopted? I don't know the legal language, but kind of agreed, and then that GEF has nominated as a financing mechanism, so that once that it's diplomatically adopted, we will be working for Minamata. I was also there 2 weeks ago in Geneva when this BRS and the Rotterdam, Stockholm, the Basel, that the conventions are coming together and having this synergetic the COPs. And I came to really, I'm convinced that the chemical, though not everybody well understand the issue. It's a very, very significant part of global commons, and our sustainable development is very much hinges on this and how we can address this pop issue, which is, to be honest and based on my own experience, not really well known to a general public. And we are very happy and excited that we were nominated as a financing mechanism of Minamata, partly because I'm Japanese, and I feel very humbled that the GEF is nominated as financing mechanism and to help global countries around the globe to address this challenge. As you said, the challenge is enormous, and as a first step, we need to help countries to actually ratify the convention. In order for that, we have to help them understand that the stock taking and the inventories and how much challenge they do have, and how the institution convention can help them to address those challenges. So knowing that it takes time for a country to ratify, and we need, I think, 50 countries to ratify for the convention to become entry into force. And so meanwhile, we will be helping them to do this and stock taking, the inventory, and also do a bit of the demonstration work. So it will actually take a few years. That is, and, like or not, it's, I understand, very, very time consuming work, particularly to do it right. So for donors, and it's actually quite good timing, because we are now under the discussion with donors that to try to solicit money or to give us more money, and we definitely make the case that the Minamata Convention needs, actually it's a new convention to us that needs resources to kind of implement. So you said it's a huge amount of resources. It's quite right. But like or not, first few years, that it's more like an inventory work, and then then after that, how much investment we need to take care of is a bit of separate discussion. So for the next 4 years, that when our next replenishment is discussed or targeting, that we kind of come up with that, hopefully with convention people, a kind of manageable program. But of course, we need to really have to make a case very strongly with donors.
Great. So one last question. Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, there's only one last one.
Yeah, my name is Clive Mutunga from Population Action International. My question is about issues of social dimensions and gender. In GEF's own internal evaluation done in 2010, it was reviewed that social issues, including gender, were not being reflected in most of the projects that were being implemented, especially those within the climate funds. And a management decision was reached to kind of to put more attention to social and gender issues. So I wanted your word, like a comment on how this has happened over the last couple of years, and whether issues of gender and other social sector issues are part of the GEF strategy moving forward. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. That is very much part of our deliberation. You are quite right that among several sectors, the climate change mitigation is the area where the gender recognition is the lowest, while the biodiversity, land, and others, actually the gender is much more highly recognized. I mean, it's kind of being treated or designed in the project. And we were actually discussing internally, is that because the project doesn't, the gender aspect is irrelevant, or we are just missing it, or we just don't do it right. Interestingly, well, for biodiversity, you can, or land, you can see that in a community that led by women really, really active to do it right. In case of the climate change, even within that focal area, for renewable energy which involve the community, you see much higher involvement of the gender. So it seems that the issue is maybe partly it's a missing opportunity or we don't do it right, but partly it's also the relevance. So that so we need a very rigorous analysis to understand more the which part that we don't do it right, which part is actually the issue of the relevance. So that we are very much committed to do that kind of analysis better. And also because that we are working with 10 implementing agencies, so that we need to make sure that those agencies do share the same goal, the same policy and the same implementation and same kind of, the direction we go forward. So going forward under GEF 6 and GEF long-term strategy, it is very much on our agenda, and we are very much committed to do it right.
Thank you. So this is the final Managing Our Planet seminar until September, when we will be back with another topic that deals with the scale of the environmental challenges that humanity faces. But I think you have had a very exciting glimpse of the energy and change and imagination that is going into leading the GEF forward. And so thank you so much, Naoko, for giving us the time to learn about it.
Thank you so much. Our website is always there, and you actually see those signature program under the GEF 6 and strategy, and it's very much open to the comment. So that